Hi, you're watching Reddit Confessions. Grab your headphones, because this one, it gets ugly fast. I'm not your mother, Lowell. I'm not here to raise a full-grown man who doesn't pay a single damn thing. That was the fourth plate she smashed this month. I didn't even flinch. Just stood there in my slippers, holding a receipt for $742 worth of bills I'd paid the night before. But apparently, my silence made her angrier than any comeback ever could. Oh, you're gonna do the silent thing again? Just stand there like a sad puppy? You know what, forget it. I'll pay everything from now on. Maybe then you'll get off your lazy. I set the receipt on the counter. Didn't say a word. Then, I took my phone, opened our bank app, and transferred the last bit of my paycheck into a new, private account I'd created 3 days earlier, right after the third plate incident. That's how I left her, mid-sentence, screaming at a half-empty fridge, with the echo of broken ceramic still rattling on the tile floor. No goodbye. No slamming doors. Just the quiet hum of a decision I should have made years ago. And yet, I didn't leave the house. Not yet. I stayed. I watched. I waited. The real story didn't start with the screaming or the accusations. It started when she believed I'd never have the guts to pull away. That I'd just keep patching the cracks and smiling through clenched teeth. She didn't notice the Amazon Prime was gone until 2 days later. Didn't notice the lights flickered because I removed my auto payment from the electric bill. Didn't realize the water was under my name until she called them, furious, and got redirected to me. She didn't know how many things I actually held together, because she never looked long enough to see. And maybe I was the fool for thinking she'd ever care. But the worst part? It wasn't the shouting. It wasn't the money. It was the way she looked at me the last time I tried to hug her. Like I was dirt. Like touching me was a chore. Like she was doing me a favor by still being in the same room. And yet, I still loved her. Pathetic, right? That's what this story is really about. Not revenge. Not power. Not some movie-style triumph. It's about what happens when love turns into obligation. When a wife turns into a landlord. And when a man, who everyone thinks is spineless, finally realizes silence isn't weakness. It's a warning. It started unraveling faster than even I expected. 3 days after I stopped paying for everything, I came home to find her sitting on the floor in the kitchen, her laptop open, a calculator in one hand, and a glass of wine in the other, half drunk, both the wine and probably her. The fridge was humming louder than usual, almost like it was mocking her. I noticed the power-saving mode kicked in early. That was intentional. I downgraded the electricity plan. She looked up, her face pale, mascara smudged like she'd wiped her eyes with the back of her hand in a panic. The internet got shut off, she said, voice flat. Why didn't you pay it? I didn't even pretend to act surprised. I just dropped my keys into the bowl by the door and walked past her. I don't pay anything, remember? She stared at me like I had spoken in a foreign language. Lowell, seriously, this isn't funny. I turned. Neither was calling me useless in the middle of your tantrum. Remember that? She stood up slowly, pushing her chair back. You're seriously going to let me handle everything now? You insisted. The next day, I left for work early. She texted me twice that morning, first asking for the login to the utility account, then accusing me of being cruel. I didn't respond to either. I just kept working, tapping my keyboard in silence, rereading her words with a pit in my stomach and a growing sense of bitter freedom. But that night? That's when things started turning dark. She came home late, again. This time I didn't ask where she'd been. I didn't even look up from my book. But when I got up to use the bathroom, her purse flopped open on the couch and I saw 2 receipts sticking out, both from a restaurant called the Hollow Brick. I recognized it. That's the upscale place she once told me was too romantic for us. One of the receipts was for a bottle of wine and 2 entrees. The other had a handwritten message at the bottom. Same time next week. G. I put the receipts back exactly the way I found them. I didn't ask. I didn't scream. I didn't cry, at least not in front of her. But that night, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling with my hands on my chest, wondering how long she'd been having these dinners. And who the hell was G? The next morning, I quietly pulled the backup hard drive out of the drawer in the hallway cabinet. Years ago, I set up auto backups of our shared cloud storage, mostly for photos, bills, legal documents. She never knew. I plugged it into my laptop, navigated through the folders, and what I found stopped my breath cold. There were dozens of voice notes. Short, sloppy, sometimes drunken audio clips she'd recorded and sent, presumably to G. I didn't recognize his voice, but in one of the clips, she said, "Lowell thinks I'm at a yoga class. He still makes the bed every morning like it's going to save our marriage. It's adorable." She laughed. He laughed. They both sounded like they were lying in bed. I sat there, shaking. Not from rage. From humiliation. From the awful realization that I had become her joke. Her charity case. The husband she kept around like an unpaid assistant. I wanted to smash something. I wanted to confront her, demand answers, scream, cry, do something. But I didn't. Instead, I made a copy of those audio files and saved them under a folder titled Reminders. She still had no idea I knew. And honestly, that was the part one began to enjoy. She started cracking 2 weeks later. It was subtle at first. A few sarcastic jabs turned into full-blown snide remarks at breakfast. Passive-aggressive comments about the cold apartment. She asked why the heat didn't kick in that morning. I told her it was because I'd cancelled the auto debit for the gas. She blinked like she couldn't process what I was saying. I sipped my coffee without looking at her. She didn't say anything after that. Not a word. Just slammed the cabinet a little too hard and left for work. The silence between us was no longer a tension, it was a weapon. I used to fill the gaps in our conversations with hopeful small talk, stupid anecdotes from my office, thoughts about the dog I wanted us to adopt. But now, I let the silence stretch like an elastic band that she couldn't stop from snapping back at her. But here's where it gets interesting. Cambria is the kind of woman who cares about perception more than reality. She's the "everything's fine" type on Instagram. The curated life. Hashtags about blessed mornings, while I sat 10 feet away, watching her compose captions she didn't mean. I knew that image would be the first thing to fall apart if I pushed the right domino. So I did. I reached out to her friend Brielle. We were never close, but I knew she had a mouth like a speakerphone and couldn't resist drama. I texted her this. "Hey, random question. Do you know someone named G? Cambria's been out a lot lately and I found a note signed by that name. Not accusatory. Just vague enough to light a fuse." Brielle responded in exactly 9 minutes. "Oh. Wow. That might be Gavin. But I thought she told you already." "Forget I said that." "Oh, Brielle. You chaotic little goldmine." I didn't respond. I let her spiral in her own guilt. But I knew that message would be itching at her conscience all night. And I was right. Because at 11:43 p.m., Cambria's phone lit up with a message from her. Gavin said Lowell's been asking about him. What's going on? I wasn't snooping. The phone was face down. I had changed the Wi-Fi password earlier that day. Guess who needed help reconnecting? Cambria stared at the message. Froze. Then slowly turned to look at me, like I was some puzzle she couldn't figure out. "You talked to Brielle?" I shrugged. "I don't remember." "Probably." Her eyes narrowed. "What did you say?" I paused for a beat. Then smiled, gently, almost kindly. Nothing important. She hated that answer. The next morning, I found her pacing the kitchen with her phone to her ear, whispering aggressively. She didn't even care that I was standing behind the doorframe watching her panic. She said things like, "I think he knows," and "No, he hasn't said anything directly," and "Just keep your head down." You'd think this would be the part where I confront her. Explode. Demand the truth and throw everything on the table. But no. That's not how this story goes. Instead, I started preparing an exit strategy. I printed every receipt I'd covered over the last year. Rent, groceries, subscriptions, even the vet deposit for the dog we never got because she wasn't ready to commit to anything new. I packed them in a plain manila envelope and slid it into the safe under my sock drawer. I also pulled up our lease agreement. Technically, the apartment was in both our names, but I was the only one with a good enough credit score to renew it. And renewal was coming in 16 days. I started checking apartments. Quietly. Strategically. I even found one in the same neighborhood, smaller, but cozier. A place I could breathe. And here's where it gets cruel, at least, that's what some would say. I didn't tell her anything. I let her live in the illusion that I was still there. Still broken. Still crawling. But what she didn't know was this: the next time she'd yell at me about not paying for anything, she'd be saying it from an apartment lit by candles because I'd let the lights go out, and I wouldn't be there to hear it. It wasn't the darkness that got to her first, it was the water. I'd warned the landlord in writing that I wasn't renewing the lease. Cambria hadn't checked her email in weeks. She assumed everything just rolled forward, like magic. She assumed someone like me would handle it. Except I wasn't that someone anymore. When the water shut off on a Tuesday morning, she called me screaming. "Lowell! The water is off, again. What the hell are you doing?" I was in the break room at work, pouring myself the world's most bitter coffee from a machine that belonged in a museum. I didn't answer her call. I didn't even flinch when it rang again. And again. Instead, I opened the copy of the lease agreement and took a photo of the section that outlined who was responsible for utility payments after non-renewal. Then I texted it to her. No words. Just that image. 10 minutes passed before she replied with, "Are you seriously doing this right now? Grow up." The irony of her telling me to grow up while she ran our shared apartment into the ground felt too thick to swallow. I didn't answer. And from that moment forward, I didn't lift a finger to help her recover. That same night, while she was stewing in her bubble-less bath, a letter arrived. I had filed a formal request to dissolve our joint checking account. The bank required both parties to be notified by mail. I made sure it arrived on a Friday so she'd sit with it all weekend. I came home to find the envelope torn on the counter, her wine glass tipped over, and a half-burned candle flickering near a stack of unpaid bills. She was pacing again. It was her go-to coping mechanism, like a shark that couldn't sit still or it'd die. "Why are you being like this?" she finally asked, her voice quieter than usual. No more rage. Just confusion. Desperation. I sat down, slowly, like I was settling into a confession booth. "Cambria, you told me I don't pay anything. I'm just making your wish come true." She stared at me like she didn't recognize who I was anymore. I think that was the first time she really saw me, not the background character she was used to ignoring, but someone with edges. Someone who had stopped clinging. She opened her mouth to say something, but just then her phone buzzed. I saw the name flash across the screen, Gavin. Not just the letter anymore, his full name. She turned it face down. Didn't answer. But I saw the fear in her eyes. And now we're getting to the part one didn't plan for. The part where things stopped being about money or gas bills or revenge. The part where truth started bleeding out, fast and uncontrollably. That weekend, I got a knock on our door. It was a guy named Aaron, someone I'd only met twice before. He was one of Gavin's friends. I could tell from the look in his eyes that this wasn't a social visit. "Hey," he said awkwardly, scratching the back of his neck. "I know this is weird, but, are you and Cambria still together?" I raised an eyebrow. "Why?" He shifted on his feet. "Because Gavin's been bragging for weeks about how he's taking over your life. Said you're a pushover, that you don't even know what's coming." I didn't respond. I just held the doorframe a little tighter. Aaron looked down, then muttered, "He showed us some pictures. Like, private ones. Of her. Said he took them while you were home, asleep." My breath locked in my chest. I thanked him. Shut the door. Sat down on the edge of the couch and stared at the floor for what felt like an hour. My ears were ringing. My vision blurred. Not because I didn't see this coming. But because deep down, part of me had still hoped this was all a misunderstanding. That she was just, unhappy. Confused. Looking for something she thought she'd lost. But no. This wasn't a mistake. This was a choice. She chose this man. She let him into our home. She let him laugh about me. Take things that weren't his. Mock me in front of people I'd never even met. And now I was done watching. I printed every photo. Every receipt. I copied the audio files onto a USB drive and sealed them in an envelope. Then I dropped it all off at her mother's house. Because if Cambria was going to destroy something, I wanted her to do it in full view of the people who raised her. The knock on Cambria's mother's door was harder than I meant it to be. I don't know what I expected, maybe silence, maybe for her mom to refuse to even look me in the eye, but she opened the door in her robe, holding a steaming mug, her eyes already skeptical. That woman never liked me. Not when we first met, not when I proposed, not even on our wedding day. But she respected the way I put up with Cambria's moods. Her words, not mine.